These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, And the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever... Extraordinary, compelling. They showed the entire video of the, not just Officer Chauvin, but he and the officers, the other 5 officers who were participating with him in holding back the crowd or sitting, on George Floyd's back and legs, and of course Chauvin murdering him as we watched, as people were begging him to stop. As the prosecution pointed out, there was an EMT, or a guy who was trained as an EMT, in the crowd, a first responder in the crowd. There was another person who was a mixed martial artist who had EMT training, or CPR kind of training. In the crowd, they tried to intervene. They were not allowed to intervene by the police officers. He is being charged, Chauvin is being charged with both second and third degree murder. Second degree murder, the much more serious charge, but they were successful. The defense did not want there to be a third degree murder charge in there, because that's the fallback position if the jury thinks, well, he was a cop and you just never know. Cops have to have a lot of latitude and quack, 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 the stuff that they usually throw out. At least they could use the third-degree murder charge, so he would still be convicted of murder and still would spend probably a decade or more in prison. There are 12 jurors and 3 alternatives. It's a mix of men and women, black, multiracial, and white people. 7 of them are under 40 years old. And, in all probability, there's other officers who are on trial now, 3 specifically of the, they've all been fired now, ex-Minneapolis Police Departments. Floyd Keung, K-U-E-N-G, Kung, maybe I'm mispronouncing it, Thomas Lane, and Tao Thao, T-H-A-O, are charged with aiding and abetting a murder. And if Chauvin is convicted of murder, it's going to make it a lot easier to have an aiding and abetting. If he's dismissed or declared innocent or whatever it may be, it's going to be much more difficult. So, another trial kind of hangs on this trial. And the defense started their little shtick and, started going into, he's a bad guy and he was on drugs and he had a history of heart disease and he passed a $20 counterfeit bill, and the guy came out and politely asked him to make it good, and he said, screw you. And, basically trying to portray George Floyd as a bad guy. Whether he was a bad guy or not is not what's in dispute here. Whether he was a bad guy or not has nothing to do with whether he should get the death penalty for, what may or may not turn out to be passing a phony $20 bill, which was what started all this. That's not the issue. The issue is whether, when police are stopping people that they think are bad guys, they should kill them. I mean, this is pretty straightforward stuff. I don't get why, this is like confusing or, disconcerting or whatever the word is to people on the right. But, you watch Fox News for 10 minutes and it's all about, another bad guy, black guy is trying to defend him. Yeah, right. The same thing, well, not the same thing. There's an analog to this. In the piece that I published today over at hartmannreport.com, and by the way, just to give you the layout for the day today, in our second hour, I want to get into a free market solution about guns. We revisit our gun discussions. In our third hour, I want to touch on the filibuster because it is so much bigger than just voting rights or just passing some legislation to spend some money. This whole voting rights issue has become something much, much larger than any of that. But right now, the question that I ask in the headline, in fact, of today's piece over at HartmannReport.com, which you can sign up for free, is will America hold Trump and his enablers to account for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter now that Trump has gone out and bragged that he not only ignored scientific evidence, he did the exact opposite of what he was told? I mean, it's pretty straightforward stuff. And you say, well, 400,000? Why'd you say 400,000? Well, here's the deal. While Deborah Birx, I don't know if you caught the CNN special last night. Sean and I were just talking about it a few minutes ago. It was rather horrifying. And there were, a lot of the things, for example, that the former CDC director was ruining the CDC. I don't know how to say it beyond that. That really didn't get brought up. But, everybody was trying to say, well, I didn't do it. Trump made me do it, essentially. Or, we thought we were doing the best that we could. But so Birx and her friends are on their kind of clean up our reputation tour right now. But, well, and she pointed out last night that, she was getting significant pressure from Donald Trump and the people around him. And ultimately, after April, she just got cut out of all the conversation altogether. And I would say that was after April 7th. She didn't specify a date. But CNN clearly was mystified about what happened after in the third week of April. How come everything changed? Or the second week of April? But she said that she was getting this pressure. Trump himself then went on Fox News a day or three ago and said that when Anthony Fauci told him how to save American lives, he said, I was doing the opposite of what he was saying, of what Fauci was saying. So this 400,000 number that I came up with, I didn't come up with. The Brookings Institution convened a convention over the last week, and solid scientific evidence was laid out that had Donald Trump simply done the simple stuff that like Australia was doing, or frankly most other developed countries in the world were doing. Now at this point in time, you can't kind of hold up some of the Western European countries as great models because they got caught flat-footed. I mean, the virus just burned through those countries before they realized what was going on. But the countries that were like Australia that said, or New Zealand or Taiwan or South Korea, they just said, hey everybody, wear masks. Don't go into any public venues. We're going to shut down the bars and restaurants. They did that, and very, very few deaths. So what these scientists said, well, this is how Reuters summed it up in the first paragraph of their story. Quote, the United States squandered both money and lives in its response to the coronavirus pandemic, and it could have avoided nearly 400,000 deaths with a more effective health strategy and trimmed federal spending by hundreds of billions of dollars while still supporting those who needed it. In other words, because Donald, and in fact, they go on to say, this is one of the researchers at the conference said, this guy is an economist with UCLA. He said, if by last May, the country had adopted widespread mask, social distancing, and testing protocols. By last May. Now, there was no dispute among anybody in real science by May that we had to have masks, social distancing, and testing. But Donald Trump, no, he was opposed to all those things. So anyhow, they say, if by last May the country had adopted widespread mass social distancing and testing protocols while awaiting vaccines, end of quote, we could have saved 400,000 Americans from death. And that doesn't even count all the people who got sick and now have long hauler syndrome, or had strokes and are not paralyzed, or have damage to their lungs and now have COPD, or have damage to their heart and now have heart conditions. I mean, it does. So the question I'm asking is, when is this man going to be held accountable? When does the manslaughter trial begin? When does Congress look into this? I'll fill in this rant in just a minute on the other side of the break here. But, whatever happened to accountability in America? Republican accountability. I'll tell you about that right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back, Tom. All right, welcome back. I'll be right back. Excuse me. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Elizabeth in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
I was watching the trial that's going on about the killing of George Floyd. I saw a similar incident when I was living in South St. Pete, and it was a black neighborhood, and a sister got the police called on her, and the woman taught at the college was totally decent, but the policeman overreacted, grabbed her hand as she was leaning away from him on her Volkswagen, and he jerked her across so hard he hit the hood of his police car. She landed on the ground, and he was sitting on her chest choking her. And I screamed out, "You're killing her." And he heard a white voice and snapped, and he stopped. And I had to testify with some kind of commissioner or something, and they moved that black man out of the white neighborhood rather than waste all that money they put on the training.
So wait a minute. So the black family that was the victim of police violence moved out of the neighborhood? Was that got moved out of the?
No, police.
What am I missing?
Moved the white policeman that they had invested money in training and all that to a white neighborhood only, because he had racial bigotry that was dangerous.
Oh, so instead of firing the cop or even punishing him, they simply said, you can't do this to black people anymore, so you just get to do it to white people, but we know you'll be respectful because you're obviously a white supremacist.
That's the other thing. They were trying to blame what happened on her. She was having an argument with her sister for asking her what she and her white husband did in the bed. And her kids were preschoolers, so she was upset. And the sister, her black sister, she was black, called the police on her. And they sent out a policeman with an attitude who overreacted. And
wow.
I testified.
This is a biracial couple.
What happened, because they were trying to cover their touche, excuse me for the word, by having her arrested like she was at fault. And I testified, and she got totally exonerated.
Yeah, well, that's good. Elizabeth, about what year did this happen?
Oh, God, it's been about 30 years ago. This black-white stuff has been going on a long time.
Oh, it's been going on for 420 years. I mean, it's, yeah, I'm totally with you. Or 400 years, I guess.
Were black, and I can still name them, and we'd sit around joking. And one of them that I had the most fun with was half Hawaiian.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. I think people need to be growing up around people who don't look like them. We need to have diversity in our media, but we have to have diversity in our neighborhoods as well. Elizabeth, thanks a lot for the call. Yeah, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. We're out of time here, but thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing that story. It's a great story. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. It looks like the trial is reconvening. Stick around. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So there's a new study that this is not peer-reviewed, but it is in preprint. It is being peer-reviewed as we speak, where the scientists were looking at the ability of the COVID virus to jump from the human species. It started with bats, and then it apparently went to pangolins and then to humans, to jump from humans to other species, which would be a big problem. If we can infect other mammals, our cats and dogs, if we can infect rats or mice
who have traditionally been disease vectors for all kinds of things, from the bubonic plague to hantavirus, if we can infect them with this virus, we've got a whole brand new problem. And sure enough, they have found that these two variants, B351 and P1, both can infect mice in the laboratory. And they say this abrogation of the species barrier represents a serious problem. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Well, just to wrap this up, the Republicans, for some reason, have kind of forgotten their own history. Back in 1940s, in the 1940s, I mean, it was 1941 when, December 7, 1941, when Pearl Harbor happened. And Republicans were all in a froth about this. My dad, who was a teenager at the time, when Pearl Harbor, he was a young teen, he joined the Army at 17 in 1944. And he, to the day he died, was convinced that FDR let the Japanese attack us at Pearl Harbor because he wanted to get into the war against Hitler in Europe. He wanted to help out the British. He wanted to help out his friend Winston Churchill. Which, I mean, you can argue that if it's true, that might not necessarily be the most terrible thing, but the Republicans were all over this. They were like, we've got to have accountability. I mean, this president might have created a circumstance, Pearl Harbor, and lied to us about it, that led to the death of hundreds of thousands of American soldiers in World War II. What the hell happened? And so, one of the four horsemen on the U.S. Supreme Court, his name was Justin Owen Roberts. He was the lead conservative on the court. He was the one of the crankiest of the right-wing cranks. He was the guy who changed his mind in 1937 after enormous public pressure and started going along with the New Deal. But up until that point, he had been he was one of the guys who said, no, you can't have child labor laws. That's a violation of the right to contract, for example. So anyhow, he headed up what was called the Roberts Commission in the late 1940s to investigate Franklin Roosevelt. What did he know and when did he know it? And after they looked at all the evidence, they said, well, it wasn't FDR. So, and they laid the blame on the two guys who were in command of Pearl Harbor. That was the Navy Admiral, his name was Husband Kimmel, and the Army General, his name was Walter Short. Whenever Republicans think that a Democrat might be to blame for anything, they want accountability. The George W. Bush administration used private servers throughout the 8 years of their administration to conduct government business. And then as George Bush was leaving office, 22 million emails were deleted from that system and have never been seen since. But, in comes Barack Obama. He makes Hillary Clinton his Secretary of State. She sets up a private server in her home just for her personal emails so that she can keep her personal emails separate from her government email. And they find out about this and they go absolutely bat guano crazy. Oh my God, 30,000 missing emails? What was so astonishing to me during that entire period was that the media seemed to have forgotten that George W. Bush lost 22 million emails and Dick Cheney and all their senior officials. But they went nuts. I mean, this investigation covered 3 years, cost our country tens of millions of dollars, and in the end, she was cleared of all the charges. But they had to hold her accountable for something. So when 4 Americans died at Benghazi in the years after the State Department had asked for extra funds to harden the Benghazi outpost, and Republicans in the United States Senate said, no, that's big government spending. We're not going to appropriate the money. After that happened, we had 4 Americans die at Benghazi. It was accountability time again. And again, years of investigations into Benghazi, dozens of over a dozen congressional investigations, hours of testimony, and at the end, nothing. Republicans even held Richard Nixon accountable. It wasn't Democrats who went over to the White House to tell him he had to leave town. It was a bunch of Republicans led by Barry Goldwater. So now we have a Republican former president who made intentional decisions, I would say politically motivated decisions, in the face of all the evidence that, according to scientists this week, led to 400,000 Americans dying who did not have to die. What are we going to do? I think this is manslaughter. I think at the very least of 400,000 people, I think it's mass murder. I think that there should be accountability. I think that there should be a criminal trial, and I realize, sovereign immunity is going to make that very, very difficult. So, lacking that, at the very least, we have to have congressional hearings, and there needs to be a commission looking into this. But I would love to see a court looking into it as well. I mean, over 500,000 Americans have died, and 400,000 of them, according to these scientists, did not need to die. So, Donald Trump kills people, Derek Chauvin kills a man, and God only knows what he did before this. That I'm pretty sure that evidence can't be brought into court. Accountability for Chauvin? We'll see. I'm skeptical, but hey, it's a diverse jury, and it seems like a slam dunk case. We'll see. I'll pick up your phone calls right after the break. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where despair is not an option. The Thom Hartmann Program, back with your calls right after this.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglas was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
In the science revolution this week, look out as Rand Paul may be infecting America with a brand new COVID epidemic, and we may have no protection. Investigative journalist Greg Pallas is here on the Exxon Valdez disaster 33 years ago. He's saying, don't buy Exxon's fable of a drunken captain. We just passed World Water Day, and Rihanna Eckel from Food and Water Watch drops by about the growing threat of water privatization. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. "34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your thoughts on the Derek Floyd trial and holding Donald Trump accountable for this shocking number that was just reported last Thursday, or came out of this conference last Thursday, that 400,000 Americans did not have to die if Donald Trump had simply taken the simple measures that were being taken at that point in time, back in May, by other countries. It's amazing. And of course, the Chauvin trial is back on. Right now, the defense is presenting their case. They've got the 9/11 operator on the stand. They're just basically, laying the foundation for everything. I'll keep you up to date on what's going on with that as well. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
The Derek Chauvin trial, of course. And I did want to give you what I think is going to be the outcome of that trial. I think that Mr. Chauvin, and I use the term Mr. Loosely, I think he's going to be acquitted. And I think he's going to be acquitted because what he did was within, and that's a separate argument, but was within the training confines of that particular department. But more importantly, Tom, what I wanted to say to you is this. This is the same playbook that we see over and over and over again, whether it's Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, there's names, Freddie, Oscar, Tony, Sandra Botham, Walter, Tatiana, plethora of others. They're all dead. But the cessation of their heartbeats is just the first killing. You see, we get killed as black people in the United States 3 times. The first killing is a result of hatred and a penchant towards brutality and a false sense of superiority. And once the body that housed that summarily executed black person in America is destroyed and traumatized, the second killing begins. The body is the first part of a triumvirate. The second part is the character of the executed. The second killing is the result of denial, hypocrisy, and the inner conflict that arises from both. The third killing is the general demoralization of black people in the United States as a group. And this holy trinity results in a psychosocial electric fence, and it's very much by design. This happens over and over again. You may recall the infamous riots, as they are called, in Los Angeles in 1992. Everyone attributed it to the Rodney King case, but that wasn't what set those things off. What set it off was the killing of Latasha Harlins, a 15-year-old black child who was shot in the back of the head, had to have a closed casket funeral by a Korean store owner who got a 6-month suspended sentence and 140 hours, I think, of community service. And then after that child was killed, it was justified in the media that her parents were crack addicts and her father was abusive. What did that have to do with the killing of that child? And almost a year ago, I wrote a piece called Once Dead, Thrice Killed. And this happens over and over again. Trayvon Martin.
I remember, I read it.
In his book.
You're talking the piece you put on opednews.com.
Yes. Yeah. Trayvon Martin had weed in his book bag. A 17-year-old boy. How many white boys have weed in their book bag at 17 years old in suburban America? Are you kidding? And this happens over and over again. And I'm wondering, when are the American people going to wake up to this playbook?
Yeah, it's an old shtick, it demonize and criminalize black people, and Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, just laid this out. He said, we couldn't make black people illegal in the United States or anti-war hippies. He said, so we associated them with heroin and cocaine and marijuana, and then we criminalized all those things to the max so that we could use those as excuses to disrupt their communities. That was the phrase he used. Ehrlichman, the guy who was Richard Nixon's right-hand man. And, obviously this goes back 400 years, but the techniques that they're using, that they keep fine-tuning. And so you criminalize the behavior of the people, even the very lives of the people, and then when they do anything in any way that causes a cop to come in and overreact is not the right word, viciously kill one of them, then what do? They start saying, oh, well, implicitly he deserved it because he was a bad guy. Well, how did that happen, right? I'm reciting your 3-part thing here, am I not?
Yes, and I will tell you this in closing, that I believe it was John Paul Sartre. I may be wrong, but I believe it was John Paul Sartre who said this: if I can convince you of absurdities, I can get you to commit atrocities.
Yeah. I don't recall specifically who said it. You may well be right, but it is something that is so important for all of us to consider. Whew, amazing. Kenyatta, always great to hear from you. Keep up the great writing over at opednews.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Are you publishing on Medium now, or are you still over at Op-Ed?
I am publishing at Medium as well as Op-Ed as well as Black Agenda Report. So I'm just getting started with Medium, and thanks to your guidance and pointing me in that direction. And so, I keep trying to just educate people as best I can, get them to think.
So if somebody wants to find you on Medium, how do they do it?
Ron Kenyatta at Medium.com.
And it's ROHN or RON?
Yes, sir. ROHN.
Right. Kenyatta. Great. Thank you, Kenyatta. Great talking with you. I do appreciate the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Yeah, I was just wanted to say that I was listening to this CNN report on the and it was coming from doctors. And Deborah Burks claims that she heaped this praise on Donald Trump in an effort to
Yeah, Dave, you're far enough away from your microphone that I can't hear what you're saying. I don't know if you're driving or what, but I need you to get your mouth closer to your microphone right now.
Are you there? Yeah, are you there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Tom. Yeah, but I was saying in the CNN special that Deborah Burks, Dr. Deborah Burks, was claiming that she heaped this praise on Donald Trump in an effort to stay in the administration, to mitigate, to try to mitigate the disaster she saw coming. And I've seen that more and more. I've seen it more and more, people doing that. And I accept what she's saying. And the problem is we have a culture of non-accountability for leaders. I mean, people don't expect accountability. And let me tell you where this is relevant right now, because you were referring to World War II earlier, okay? Look, Joe Biden, who I proudly voted for and I believe in, he reinstated, he's trying to do sanctions on the Nord Stream 2. That comes back, that is from the Obama administration. That's like a legacy sanctions against Russia and Nord Stream. Germany has already said, look, we need, it's too late. We need to maybe waive these sanctions on Russia, all right, over the Nord Stream. And the thing is Russia is analyzing all this, and I don't think they're in the mood for waiving sanctions or anything. And during World War II, Germany decided to cancel out the American Navy subsurface using submarines to combat the American Navy. Okay, but Japan never did. Japan said, look, we can do it underwater and we can do it from the air. That's where the American Navy is vulnerable.
So, Dave, what's your point?
Well, my point is, if we do not expect accountability, if we do not demand accountability, that is going to be utilized by our adversaries to their advantage. All right, and there are all kinds of ways.
We have to have accountability for 300,000 deaths. It's insane it's just insane that we don't. Dave, thank you. Nancy in Palatine, Illinois. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for all you do. I'm a long-time listener. First caller.
Thank you, Nancy.
First-time caller.
Thank you, Nancy.
Lost both my parents to COVID in November, my dad on Thanksgiving morning. And I guess my question to you, Tom, is I'm all for accountability because I'm very angry at what happened to 500,000 families like our own family. My dad was in the hospital 2 weeks, died alone. And we're very resentful. So, yes, we want accountability. We want it from Donald J. Trump. We want it from Michael Pence. But it isn't enough for myself or families like mine to just have a congressional investigation. Frankly, what kind of investigation are we going to get when half of the representatives and the senators still now don't think anything really bad happened, and hey, people get sick, they die, and that's not what we want. Now, I have to be honest. I have a good attorney friend. I have asked him what would be a way to hold Trump accountable. Can we do a class action lawsuit? Can we do a civil lawsuit? And
what did he say?
He said that he believes that there will be that type of accountability.
That's interesting. Nancy, I'm sorry it's the end of the we're hitting the break here, but thank you for the call, and I'm so sorry to hear about your parents. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You know, sovereign immunity protects Trump while he's in office. Since he's been out of office, he's continuing to spew a lot of this weird stuff about masks. Maybe that. And welcome back. Let's see here. Mark in Sherman Oaks, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, first-time caller. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
I would like to have your point of view. I'm French, and France maybe have undeniably the best healthcare system in the world. They have been in lockdown since almost a year now, basically, with few interruptions. They have a president that is the opposite and has taken the opposite route of Trump, and they have the slightly higher rate of death than the U.S. What's your point of view on that? I mean, compared to going after Trump, this horrible monster, for so many other reasons also. What do you think? How do you think it happened in France?
My guess.
People are not obese in France, very low comorbidity level. What do you think?
I agree. It's a head scratcher, Mark. You know, the best guess, and there's a lot of discussion about this on a lot of the medical bulletin boards over in Europe, particularly the British Medical Journal, the BMJ website. You can find a lot of conversation about this. Is that, and this is happening not, by the way, just in France. This is happening across Europe, far more, frankly, than it's happening here in the United States. Is that the new variant that is sweeping Europe right now, that is kicking up that death rate and has been going on for about, 2 months now? That new variant is so much more highly contagious than the old variants that if you live in a building that has old ventilation systems, if you live in a building that was built not in the last 50 years or even the last 70 years, but built, in the last 200 years or 300 years, then if one of your neighbors gets this new variant, these new highly contagious variants, everybody in the building gets them. There's just no place to avoid it. There's no place to run and hide, basically. Because I only read one article that talked about this.
You mean it's airborne? You mean the virus is airborne?
Yeah, absolutely. And that the people who live out in the countryside are less likely to be experiencing this kind of transmission right now because their air supply essentially is not connected to 200 other people in the same block-long building.
There is no air conditioning in France, basically. You know that. It's
right. Yes, I do. I do.
And there was a higher death rate.
There is air heating.
The variant.
There is heating, and we're still on the end of the heating season. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a better explanation than that, Mark, and that's just a wild-ass guess. Do you have a theory?
No, I mean, there's also what about Africa? We were told, essentially by, I think, Dr. Fauci, that we may expect 10 million deaths in Africa. Are you aware of a disease called paludism in Africa?
No.
Yeah. Do you know what they take every day? Almost.
No.
In Africa, it's something they take as a medication for paludism. Hydrochloroquine.
Oh, you're talking about quinine, actually. Quinine bark.
Quinine, yes.
For malaria. It's not chloroquine.
No,
it's not
a
chloroquine.
derivative.
And it's not the stuff that Trump was promoting. Yeah, there's also, the problem with statistics coming out of Africa right now is so many of those countries do not have functional public health systems, and we don't know if these deaths are being accurately reported. And also, they don't have, in many parts of Africa, they don't have the kind of high-density housing that you do in Europe and in parts of the United States. I mean, look at how it just ravaged New York City. High-density housing. We'll see. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Michael in Bangor, Maine says you're a lawyer. You wanted to comment on Trump's liability for the 400,000 deaths that the scientific community is now laying at his feet.
Yeah, I would, Tom. Nice to speak with you again. I'm an anomaly. I'm a conservative lawyer. There's not many of them around. But there's no, first of all, even if they can lay this at his feet for, let's say, nonfeasance, there's no possible way that you could make a criminal beyond a reasonable doubt argument that he would be guilty of genocide, as you exaggerated. And the reason is
I didn't use that word, actually. I don't think.
I think you. I believe you did. That's why it triggered me.
Oh, perhaps I did. But, killing 400,000 people, I mean, on his watch, because he ignored the scientific evidence, and I believe he did so, April 7 was the big pivot date, Michael. Prior to April 7, you had the Trump administration shut down the United States. They had shut it down 3 or 4 weeks earlier. They were preparing. The U.S. Postal Service had already appropriated the funding and negotiated the deal to send 5 free masks to every American family. The Trump administration was going to come out in favor of all of this. This was while Deborah Birx and Anthony Fauci Dr. Fauci were still in the loop. And then on April 7th, every newspaper in America, it was basically the only story that was reported all day long on CNN and MSNBC, came out with this report that black people, who make up 17% of the U.S. population, were something like 65% of the deaths. And that all of virtually all of the deaths were happening in states with Democratic governors. That hit the media, and in the following week, and I've documented this in a half a dozen articles that you can easily find if you just search my name and April 7th. And in the following week, suddenly the conservative media, Fox News, all the right-wing hosts, and the Trump administration said, okay, time to open the country back up. Looks like this doesn't kill white people like we thought it did. It mostly just kills black people. And I think post-April 7th, you can make a case for actual malice, Michael.
I think, Tom, you're the most rational person on Sirius Progressive most of the time. I listen to you a lot. But I think that you're being conspiratorial here. You can't prove any of that. You don't. What would Trump's motive have been? He just wanted to kill black people. You think that's what he wanted to do?
No. I'll answer that. And first of all, I can prove everything I just said because I didn't do any, therefores in there. Literally, as I said, you can Google this. I've assembled all the articles from all the right-wing sites pre and post April 7th. And I've assembled all of Trump's statements pre and post April 7th. There was this screeching 180-degree turn. Last night on CNN, in this discussion, Sanjay Gupta was like, we don't know what happened in April, but suddenly the Trump administration changed. Well, that was the day. That was the day that happened. I'm sorry.
If I may, you just said, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, I'm just quoting you. You said that you could make a case for malice. Under the law, that means you are implying that he intended these actions for a particular purpose. Malice requires intent. What was his
I am not suggesting, Michael, that his purpose was to kill black people. What I am suggesting is that his purpose, and I haven't said this up to this point, so I should just lay this out very clearly, because he told us what his purpose was. He wanted to get the economy open again because he thought that the damage to the economy, which had already happened as a result of the 3 weeks since mid-March when he shut down the country, we already saw that. We had, suddenly the stock market dropped by a couple thousand points. You had millions of people who got laid off their jobs. Cities shut down, airlines shut down. He looked at that damage and he said, if this lasts for another 6-8 months, there's no way I'm going to get reelected. And so he wanted to get America back to work in order to get himself reelected, even if that meant that people died, because, hey, a majority of the people who die are going to be black. And the right-wingosphere, if you go back and look at what was happening at these right-wing sites, particularly Freedom Works, one of the big ones supported by the Kochs, it was after April 7th that suddenly they were literally promoting these Reopen America hashtags. It was a week after April 7th that Trump tweeted, what was it, Free Michigan? Or Liberate Michigan, and then liberate, he was like, he was feeding this frenzy to fight back against wearing masks and to reopen businesses. And he was doing it for the simple purpose of politics, simply to get himself reelected, knowing that it would increase the number of people who would die. Michael, your rebuttal.
I think that you're pulling a lot of threads together to try to knit a sweater that you can't make.
I am.
In terms of, that's right, and that's a problem with your case, because there are
that's how you build a case.
Premises. Pardon me?
Can you identify anything that I have said at any point in this that is not accurate? I mean, Trump himself was saying, I want to get people back to business. Trump himself said, this is going to hurt my election chances. He came out and said it.
So what? How in the world does that prove a motive to allow people to die rather than get the economy going? That's getting the economy
when someone tells you what their motive is, you believe it.
But Tom, trying to
He had all of his scientific advisors in the White House, with one single exception, Scott Atlas. All of the rest of them were telling him, if we go down this road that you want us to go down, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of dead Americans. And Scott Atlas was saying, that's okay. We can protect those old people. We just need to get herd immunity, which was a total BS thing. And Trump promoted him because he was saying what Trump thought would get him reelected, which was get the economy back going, get that stock market back up there, because when the economy is bad, incumbents don't get reelected.
Let me say something and I'll get off.
Very quickly.
The problem with your argument is that governors, not the president, were running every program to try to stop this disease, and they were ignoring him. You don't have a case for criminalization on a criminal.
There was a diversity among the governors. But you make a point, Michael. You make a point. I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you, Michael.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, We should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back, Thom Hartmann here with you. There is a one of the things that I want to talk about in this hour. I just want to throw it into the mix, and then I want to get back to holding Trump accountable as well, and of course the Chauvin trial as well. That is now kind of mired in minutia, but that's how trials happen. This is going to run all week, in all probability, but. And you've heard this before on this program. I rolled it out in the newsletter over the weekend over at HartmannReport.com. I published it yesterday, I believe. The title is Guns. There's a free market solution every Republican should love. Cars taught us how to deal with things that kill people. And, this is very straightforward stuff. Back in the early 1900s, like, 1900, 1910, 1920, back during that period, and really even the last decade of the 1800s, of 1890s, cars became so common they were replacing horses in cities all over America. And we had three problems. People were killing each other with their cars because they didn't know how to drive. If a car got stolen, there was no way to track it down, or if an abandoned car was found, there was no way to find its original owner. And when breadwinners, when the people who were the principal support for a family were killed or injured in a car accident to the point where they couldn't work any longer, disabled, then that family got wiped out through no fault of their own if they were the victim of an accident. So over a couple of decades, from the 1910s through the 1940s and 50s, we came up with this three-part solution of register every car, and I'm saying we should do this with every gun, have every driver prove to an agent of the state, to the DMV, that they know how to drive and they know the rules of the road. We should do the same thing with guns. People and the DMVs can simply expand their facilities, put a shooting range out on the side and get some good instructors in. The Army's full of them. And determine if somebody actually knows how to use a weapon. Do they know safety protocols? Do they have a gun safe at home, or at least do they understand these principles? To get a shooter's license, number two. And then number three, that everybody have liability insurance, that this is a free market solution that conservatives should love. And we learn now, and I've been working on this book, The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, and it's amazing. Did you know that insurance companies are buying GPS location data on your cell phone to find out not only how much you travel, and thus, if you're accurately reporting your mileage to them, because this has something to do with how much they charge you for insurance. But in addition to that, how quickly you leave a stoplight, right? How fast you drive on the freeway. That information is literally available from data brokers on the internet, and it's being purchased by insurance companies. And they're purchasing it also directly from cell phone companies, among others. People who sell you apps that have, traffic apps and things, they're capturing that information on you and selling it to your insurance company. So the insurance company, and we can say, well, this is pretty damn invasive. I'm not sure I'm happy about that. But the bottom line is that the insurance companies would do a hell of a deeper background check than the FBI. The insurance companies, if they had to insure you as a gun owner, they're going to look at, is this person on drugs? I mean, legal drugs, pharmaceuticals, what's their medical history? Yes, that information, you think HIPAA protects it, but there's a lot of that information that's being purchased by insurance companies right now. Is this person drinking a lot? What are their alcohol purchase habits? And yes, they can, they can get that data from your credit card companies. Most of us don't pay cash for the booze we buy, whether it's in the bar or whether it's in the liquor store or whether it's at the supermarket. And yes, that information is available for sale. Has this person ever been involved in a fight? What does their Facebook profile look like? Are they showing lots of pictures of themselves in bars? Stuff like this. I mean, it's like this is. So, they would be looking for flags for guns too. So I just, I've said this before. I'll just toss it out one last time. I really think that, it's very unlikely, as long as Citizens United stands, that, and, bribery of politicians is legal, and the NRA is still in the bribing politicians business. And there are other smaller groups that are doing it as well on behalf of promoting guns. That you're not going to have an Australia-style lockdown, clamp down on guns. But I think that this is a reasonable step. Now, to the lawyer who called, Michael, thank you very much for the call. I really appreciate hearing from conservatives, Republicans, whatever, people who disagree with me. It helps me fine-tune my arguments. And I think this is one of the reasons why I want the Republican Party back as the Eisenhower Republican Party, a rational Republican Party. And that is because I really think that we should have a two-party system. We shouldn't have had one-party rule by the GOP like we had, in part of the Trump administration. And we shouldn't have one-party rule by Democrats. We need, both. So thank you for that call. But to that point, he made the point that, how can you assert? How can I assert the Trump and the right-wing world basically flipped after April 7th? And this is from a piece that I published, what was the date? This was back on January 10th. And it's titled Coronavirus Meltdown, Why April 7th Must Go Down in Infamy. I told you, Google my name in April 7th. I'm going to republish this at some point, but because these links need to be out there. There's links to all of everything I'm saying here. Jared Kushner had put together an all-volunteer task force. Donald Trump had shut the government down. Now, this was on March 7th. We were up to 22 dead people in the United States. And on March 11th, Donald Trump made an official declaration of emergency. Shut the company down. The Dow collapsed. Millions of Americans were laid off. Jared Kushner was doing this thing. The U.S. Postal Service was preparing to send out mass. And then about 2.5 weeks later, or about 3.5 weeks later, April 7th, the New York Times ran the front page story with the headline, quote, "Black Americans face alarming rates of coronavirus infection in some states," end of quote. And all of a sudden, the entire American conservative world said, what? Rush Limbaugh declared that afternoon, and I quote, "With the coronavirus, I have been waiting for the racial component. The coronavirus now hits African Americans harder than illegal aliens, harder than women. It hits African Americans harder than anybody. Disproportionate representation." And then he went on to say, but now here's Foxacatus and Cory Booker and Kamala Harris demanding the federal government release daily race and ethnicity data on coronavirus testing patients and the health outcomes. So they want a database to prove we're not caring enough about African Americans. That was Limbaugh's response. Tucker Carlson went on Fox News and he said, "We can begin to consider how to improve the lives of the rest, the countless Americans who've been grievously hurt by our response to this. But how do we get 17 million of our most vulnerable citizens back to work? That's our task." Brit Hume, the news guy over at Fox News, joined Tucker's show and said, and I quote, "Well, the disease turned out not to be quite as dangerous as we thought." In other words, it's not killing as many white people. There were only 12,600 Americans dead on that day, April 7th. It took less than a week for Trump to get the memo. On April 12th, he retweeted a call to fire Dr. Fauci. In another tweet, he said that he had the sole authority to open the United States back up and was going to do it shortly. On April 13th, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce published a policy paper titled Implementing a National Return to Work Plan. The next day, April 14th, FreedomWorks, that billionaire-founded and funded group, that animated the Tea Party, published an op-ed calling for, quote, economic recovery, an end to the capital gains tax, and a new law to, quote, shield, end quote, businesses from lawsuits. They issued a joint, the House Freedom Caucus and FreedomWorks issued a joint statement on April 14th saying, quote, it's time to reopen the economy. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There is more, and I will share that with you after the break. I think it's time to hold not just Donald Trump, but the whole bunch of them accountable, or at least find out, lay out what happened. And welcome back. Wow, I mean, what a day, right? Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm addressing the issue of Trump's accountability. He's not going to be held accountable because then you have to hold most of the Republicans accountable also as co-conspirators. And you need them to help to hold Trump accountable. So it's just not going to happen. As much as I wish it would, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I suspect you may be right, but I mean, there were plenty of Democrats around to defend Hillary Clinton when the Republicans went after her for both her emails and for Benghazi. And they spent 3 years. It got thousands of television hours. I mean, you can argue that she wasn't held accountable because she was exonerated in both cases. But I think her reputation was so badly damaged it contributed to her losing the election, which, of course, was their goal. Why can't Democrats at least do the same for Trump and for his cronies?
Well, they could, but they don't. See, that's the thing. You mentioned it earlier. Everybody knows about Hillary's missing emails, but because the Democrats can't have a unified message like the Republicans do and blitzkrieg the media day after day with it, how many people know about George Bush Jr.'s missing emails? Not that many.
22 million of them, yes.
Exactly. But that's what I'm talking about, because the Democrats don't get out there and every time they get in front of a camera like the Republicans, spit out the same talking point, all of them, the Republicans get away with this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of leading a one-man crusade to try to end that. We'll see if I have any success, Mark. And I'm going to lean on, and I'm going to continue to lean on, any Democrat that'll listen. Mark, thank you for the call. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Tom. I wanted to say many things I've been saying, but the lawyer you were talking to, that's a prime example of what's happening with the Republican hierarchy, whether it's on a state, local, federal level. What they're doing is that they're enabling those guys to continue the Trump ideology. If that man, the only reason he wanted to stay in office was, one, to stay out of jail, to keep his head financially above water, and hopefully get the Senate and the Congress on his side and overturn the 22nd Amendment so he could become the American Putin. That's basically it. They give that guy far too much credit for having any intelligence, And because what they did, what the Republicans are doing now is they're appealing to the base instincts of the Republican Party, which, 74 million people put that guy in office. And this George Floyd thing, it's almost irrelevant to the point. It's going to work in a positive attitude for the Republican hierarchy anyway, because if he's found innocent, they're going to start blaming the Black Lives Matters in the future for tearing down America like they did before. You see what I mean? And he's found guilty. They're going to blame him again, saying, see, here you go. It's a no-win proposition for anybody that has any brains, basically,
I think, Tim, and this was one of the points that was made in this, where did I see that? There was a documentary that had something to do with, because Louise and I yesterday watched the hour-long documentary of Walter Cronkite's last interview with Lyndon Johnson. LBJ died 10 days later. And I don't recall if it was in that or it was another one, but they pointed out that at that time in the 60s, America was almost 90% white. Now we're only in I think now we're 56% white. I just don't think this stuff is going to fly anymore, Tim. I think we're coming to the end of it. It may not, and by coming to the end of it, I don't mean necessarily this year, but I really believe this decade. Tim, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I think accountability is on its way. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So just to continue, just to wrap up that to put a bow tie on this thing, and I really do need to republish this. Again, we're now, okay, April 7th was the day that the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC all said the same thing. It was literally the big story of the day. I mean, there's just no other way to describe it. And the headline in the New York Times was, and I quote, "Black Americans face alarming rates of coronavirus infection in some states." And there was a similar headline on, and you had, and I remember watching TV that day. And the networks were bringing out, in particular, their commentators who were African Americans to say, "Oh my, look at this," and there's something going on. So we get to April 12th. Trump says, "Fire Dr. Fauci and I alone can open the economy." On April 13th, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says it's time, publishes a white paper, a policy paper titled, no pun intended, white paper, policy paper titled "Implementing a National Return to Work Plan." The day after that, which would be April 14th, FreedomWorks published an op-ed on their website calling for an economic recovery program and a shield law to be passed so that businesses would be immune from lawsuits. You'll recall the Republicans kept trying to get that into every single COVID relief package for the rest of all of last year. 3 days after that, we're now up to April 17th. FreedomWorks and the House Freedom Caucus issued a joint statement declaring, and I quote, "It's time to reopen the economy," end quote. Now, keep in mind, these guys had the best science available. They knew what was coming, or at least they had a pretty damn good inkling of it. But at that point in time, because of all that news that had hit a week earlier, they believed it was mostly going to kill black people. Like there was some genetic thing about this, or because black people had historically been denied health care in the United States and still are to this day, particularly in the South, in disproportionate numbers. So therefore, healthy white people, you don't have to worry. If you're old, if you're obese, get yourself out of circulation. But otherwise, you're in great shape. So then FreedomWorks published, the next day, they published their hashtag Reopen America Rally Planning Guide. Honest to God, they pushed keep in mind, FreedomWorks is the group that fed the Tea Party, the protests against Obamacare, where people would show up with these kind of handmade signs, but somehow they showed up in $300,000 buses that were painted on the side, with "End Obamacare," "Stop Socialism," stuff like that. That was FreedomWorks, an organization that was started by the Koch brothers and their friends back in the day. And in the Reopen America Rally Planning Guide that FreedomWorks rolled out, they encouraged people to show up, quote, in person at state capitals and governors' mansions. And this was their instructions for signage. They said, and I quote, again, from FreedomWorks' website, "Keep it short, quote, I'm essential" should be these are the things that you should be holding as signs, right, to reopen the economy. "I'm essential. Let me work. Let me feed my family." And they added, "Keep the signs looking homemade." That was April 17th. On April 19th, the first of the hashtag Open the Country rallies to get widespread national attention happened in New Hampshire. Over the next 2 weeks, similar rallies, again, these were being fed by not just FreedomWorks. Now you had a whole spectrum of right-wing groups that were pushing these rallies. And of course, they were being heavily amplified on Facebook. But April 19th was New Hampshire, and within the next 2 weeks, you had Arizona, Oregon, Delaware, North Carolina, Virginia, Illinois, and a whole bunch of other states. Actually, the states that I just named, I have actual links in my article to each one of the, to news stories about each one of those early rallies. The one that got the most attention, by the way, during that period of time was the one where they showed up at the Michigan State Capitol, complete with swastikas, Confederate flags, and assault rifles. When Rachel Maddow reported that meatpacking plants were a source of mass infection, the conservative Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court said, this isn't so much of a problem. He says, quote, regular folks, end quote, from the community around the meatpacking plants. They weren't the ones that were causing the virus infection. It was the Hispanic and black people who worked there. I'm not literally quite, the only literal quote from him is the regular folks part, but you could read the articles about it. So by this point, by the end of April, within 2 weeks, or 3 weeks after April 7th, you now had this conservative meme fully and well established. And, about this time, we were figuring out that about a third of the people who died weren't necessarily black. They were in nursing homes. And then you had the useless eaters thing that started spreading on Fox News and right-wing media. Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor of Texas, told Fox News, quote, let's get back to living, and those of us who are 70 plus, we'll take care of ourselves. A conservative town commissioner in Antioch, California, said that losing many elderly people, quote, would reduce burdens on our defunct Social Security system and free up housing. We would lose a large portion of the people with immune and other health complications. I know it'd be loved ones as well, but that would once again reduce our impact on medical jobs and housing. Honest to God, he said that. This was the meme. And it was happening all over the country. And then there was this meeting that Jared Kushner was involved in, and Jane Mayer wrote about it for the New York Times. The essential strategy that they were coming up with was, so far, this virus has only hit blue states, big cities. It's a problem for the Democrats. We're not going to do anything. We just want to reopen America. Back with your calls after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And over in the Chauvin trial, the 9/11 dispatcher is still being interrogated by the prosecution and defense witnesses.
And How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people, and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power.
In the science revolution this week, look out as Rand Paul may be infecting America with a brand new COVID epidemic, and we may have no protection. Investigative journalist Greg Palast is here on the Exxon Valdez disaster 33 years ago. He's saying, don't buy Exxon's fable of a drunken captain. We just passed World Water Day, and Rihanna Eckel from Food and Water Watch drops by about the growing threat of water privatization. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I believe the trial has been suspended again, or has broken or gone into recess or whatever, the Chauvin trial. And, you know, the basic claim that the prosecutor had made in that case, the guy trying to put Chauvin in prison, was that this was an assault that led to a death. And it's just that, I mean, you know, there's just simple stuff. Look at the evidence. This is not rocket science. And I'm like, yeah, you think? So anyhow, picking up your phone calls here, Andrea in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Hey, Andrea, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, I had a different take on what I would call Donald J. Trump. I would call him a serial killer. What
you want to make your case?
Well, yeah.
I'd like to hear your case.
All right. I'm a non-lawyer. Just want to throw it out there. He ignored the science. As far as I'm concerned, that's motive. He did nothing about what he knew. That was planning to kill people. And then he allowed those people to die, and I consider that murder.
I think you can build a strong case, and this is the one that I tried to build in this article, and Louise and I were just talking about this during the break. I'm going to reprint this within the next 40 minutes or so over at Hartmann Report, this article that I published several months ago that has all the links to all these, you know, when the right wing just suddenly did this screeching U-turn, you know, in the week and a half, 2 weeks following April 7th. I think you could build a strong case that they made the decision during April, and this is something that CNN laid out last night. They just didn't draw any conclusions like I am from it, that, you know, that there's culpability or that there's racism behind it or anything like that. But that in April they made the decision that led to the deaths. And then by June, July, August, September, October, it was obvious that that decision was leading to more deaths. And again, the deaths were disproportionately affecting people of color, but nonetheless, you know, white people were dying too. I mean, it was just leading to more deaths. And at any point, October, November, December, even the first, 3 weeks of January while Trump was still president, during that entire period of time, he could have stopped this process, or he could have slowed it down. He could have encouraged just simple stuff. He could have started encouraging people to wear masks. He could have publicized the fact that he and Melania both got COVID shots while he was still president. He hid that. We didn't learn that until 2 weeks into the Biden administration. And it got leaked. I mean, Trump had been trying to hide it. I think that he's on an ongoing basis now, since he lost the election in particular, has been doing everything he can to try to sabotage the Biden administration. And one piece of that is, hey, 500,000 people died on Trump's watch. He's going to try and have another 500,000 die on Biden's watch. And so you've got these Facebook and social media memes out there that, you're going to get microchipped and Bill Gates is going to track you if you get the vaccine and look out, it might, turn you into a mutant or something. And I mean, it's just this bizarre stuff. So, Andrea, I'm not sure that serial killer is exactly the phrase, although I can't disagree with you emphatically. But
legally,
I think
it fits. Legally, I think
mass murderer is more appropriate, don't you?
Well, serial killers, I think they're kind of really both the same, actually. A mass murderer is a serial killer, in my estimation.
Yeah, but with a serial killer, you think of a guy who's just like getting all kinds of pleasure out of killing people one at a time, going from one person to the next. Where, I don't disagree. I think he delights. I mean, look at the people he executed in the last 3 weeks while he was in the White House. He executed more people than had been executed by the United States government in 70 years or 100 years, something like that. I think he delighted in every one of those deaths. I personally believe that. I agree with, we've had two psychologists, or a psychologist and a psychiatrist on this program, Dr. Bandy Lee and Dr. Justin Frank, who have both said that the man's a psychopath and delights in death. And so, I get that. But I'm thinking of, for example, decisions made by Mao Zedong or by Joseph Stalin that led to the deaths of millions of people from starvation. And those decisions were made for economic and political purposes. knowing that they would lead to starvation. And then as that starvation was happening, and literally millions of Russians were dying, millions of Ukrainians and Poles were dying, millions of Chinese were dying, those governments did nothing to mitigate that because, hey, we've got to get to the other side of this. There's a political goal here. We now look back on that and refer to them as mass murderers. And I think at some point in the future, we're going to look back at Donald Trump and refer to him as a mass murderer. But I'm totally with you. And Andrea, thank you for the call. It's what we end up calling it. History will tell, right? Not me. Susan in Decatur, Georgia. Susan, you had some thoughts about the conservative attorney who called in.
Yes, the lying, and I hope he's listening, lying conservative dirtbag lawyer that knows exactly what you're saying is correct and that Trump is guilty of malice. He's guilty of murder, homicide, however you want to label it, because we all were watching TV and listening to different outlets that said herd immunity, just get it. It's not that bad. No, you don't need a mask. You can still get together. And then it is malice because he sidelined Dr. Fauci and put a fake Dr. Atlas in the position that Dr. Fauci should have had. He did that intentionally. And then let me just add that the CDC under Trump, who is already under fire, right? They are the ones that delayed by 4 days the translation from English to Spanish about COVID, and that's why half of my family got infected. And then we do need Medicare for all because the malice caused by Trump and his goonies, his Nazi-loving people, we deserve to have Medicare for all for what we have endured. My husband is 41 years old. He had COVID in October. He's going back to the doctor now for stomach issues that just won't stop. He was never sick before, and I was asymptomatic, and now I've got side effects, and now we're having to ration who can go to the doctor when because of co-payments.
Wow. Susan, I'm so sorry to hear about your situation.
Medicare for all.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I just say that we deserve, the American people deserve, at the very least, we deserve Medicare for all for having to live like this. Because on top of the illness, on top of the people that got infected, on top of the people that are asymptomatic that don't even know, that are still going to have symptoms, possibly half of them asymptomatic are going to have symptoms 6 months down the road, right? Long-term effects. I'm having effects, so why isn't somebody else going to have effects? How do you know? This is something brand new. So,
and even people who have...
And then the people that weren't even infected or sick from COVID, they've got mental illness from being locked up in a house for a year.
Yeah. Although,
and then the QAnon freaks, the flat earth people, they need mental help because they're a bunch of conspiracy whack jobs.
Yes. Very well said on all counts. I hope you and your husband can get vaccinated. We are hearing that people who are getting COVID symptoms post-COVID, the vaccine tends to make those go away. It seems to be very good news. I'm very sorry to hear about your situation, with your family, Susan. And the one caveat I'd like to put on your rant, if you don't mind, is that we not engage in ad hominem, personal attacks on individuals. The lawyer who called, you don't know him, I don't know him, we don't know what's in his heart, whether he's a dirtbag or not.
No,
right?
But if he's been listening,
we could disagree with
as
him.
He said he agrees with the majority of what you think, but no, let's not put blame of murder and killing people on poor little old Trump. He don't deserve that. Poor little old Trump. Yeah, sure.
No, he wasn't saying he agrees with me.
But I'm sure, he was such a conservative, loving lawyer, he would have defended Hitler had he been in the same shoes. You
don't know that, Susan, and I realize we're off on a tangent now that probably is not going to be productive. But his point was that he listens to me because I'm rational, not that he agrees with me. I think he tried to make it very clear that generally speaking, he does not agree with me. But I think that we need to honor the humanity of everybody, or just assume at least the humanity of everybody, and it's easy not to do that. I had a meeting over the weekend where I failed to do that, and I'm looking back on it, thinking, I think I went over the top. It's just there are, but I get how. I mean, you are the victim of this crime. And your husband is the victim of this crime.
It's hard for people, Americans that have been through this the last year, to have humanity and decency for anybody who's been out here saying, ooh, my freedom, I can go out to eat. Ooh, my freedom, I can go to the club. Ooh, my freedom, I can have a house
I'm
party.
with you. I totally get it. Susan, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And thank you for sharing your story. I know sometimes it's difficult to share personal anecdotes, and it's always appreciated. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after
You're
this.
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Let's see here. Elmore in New York City. Hey, Elmore, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV and for holding for so long. What's up?
Oh, that's all right. Thank you. I just wanted to make two brief points and get your views on them. You're talking about guns, and I think that this country will never solve its gun problem until white people deal with two things from the past. There's severe traumatization due to scarcity and lack. That is the history of Europe. And also the use of the word white as it was put into law and implemented in religion and social conditioning. The word white itself.
Yeah, that in fact the modern concept of whiteness as used in the United States in particular, but now it's spread to other European countries, was first put into law in 1716, as I recall, or I just did the research on this.
1681.
Say that again.
1681.
Okay, thank you. But between the late 1600s, let's say 1680 and 1750, that was the period of time when all these laws were passed, and particularly after Bacon's Rebellion, where black people joined poor white people in rising up against the wealthy white planter class. And at that point, the wealthy white planter class said, holy crap, we've got to get these poor white people on our side, because when you add the poor white people to the poor black people, they're more than we are. And, and they've got more, and so that's when they started saying, oh, well, if you're poor and white, you can take land from Indians. If you're poor and white, you can abuse black people. You can do horrible things to them without any consequence. All these privileges of whiteness were put into law during that 60-year period, more or less. And and we're still living with the consequences of that to this very day, Elmore.
Yes, and also I think you couple that with the millennia of the history of Europe, with all of its wars and all of its scarcity. And listen, I lived in Sweden, and they still have to import most of what they eat. I mean, Europe didn't have anything, and everybody's had this Game of Thrones mentality. I need that carrot, so I beat you over the head and take it. And I think the European diaspora has suffered from unacknowledged trauma of fear of scarcity and lack. I mean, billionaires. Yeah,
but let me say, Elmore, I don't think, and I acknowledge that. And in fact, the great Irish migration into the United States in the 1850s, 1860s was a result of the Irish potato famine, which I think was 1848. And then you had similar problems in Italy a little later in the 1880s or 70s, as I recall, which produced another wave of migration. And famine has been frequently a part of what goes on in Europe. But I don't think that you can use that as any sort of an excuse or justification for the way that those white people, when they got here and they got wealthy, treated black people.
Well, I think that in terms of their unacknowledged fear, it's like a program running in the background where you have to have more and more. And yeah,
I get what you're saying, and I would, to the extent that I can agree with it, I would say that cause is not excuse. But Elmore, thank you very much for the call, and that's certainly not the exclusive cause. I think the exclusive cause is greed. Hey, my new book is out. The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, Reclaiming Our Democracy from the Ruling Class. Want to know more? The links are all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
First of all, I'd like to say, as a side note, that Derek Chauvin, he broke the law. I don't know if you remember them saying that he voted twice in Minnesota and also in Florida, just in case if he tries to walk on the murder charge. But
really?
Back to Trump.
I missed that.
Yeah. But so if there's an argument that we need to reform voting law because people are cheating and they're voting twice or whatever, then it's a Republican, and his name is Derek Chauvin. We can start with him. As far as Trump is concerned, we did the research on him. And also, and you got to remember, there was a sense of a feeling that dealing with these Republicans, we are literally being held at gunpoint. They are pointing the barrel of that AR-15 at us and telling us if we want doing gun control or anything else in this country, we're going to have to pry from their dead cool hands. Let's not forget that I just feel like Trump was so callous. It was, negligent. Their disregard for people's lives. This is what led up to this whole attitude, forcing people to go back to work. And no unemployment. Do you remember that? Do you remember they were saying that they won't give people unemployment? You had to go back to work, and they had to start from Texas. I think he was.
The one time Trump used the Defense Production Act was to force workers back into meatpacking plants, and they were principally black and Hispanic people.
Exactly. And then what about I think he was the lieutenant governor for Texas, telling old people that they might have to give up their lives. This was mass murder on a Republican scale. I just think these people are making me sick. They wanted to weaken the government, because look on what day that was in March, Deborah Messonnier, she came out and she was railing again. I mean, she was just telling everybody that we would have to shut businesses down. But stuff wasn't going to be as usual, like we were living. And Trump jumped on Azar and told Azar to get Messonnier out of there,
Yep.
Because
she got fired.
Because she was telling the truth. And then second of all, I remember him at the CDC with Redfield and the governor right now of Georgia. And he was saying, that they saw stuff in China and they were on it. He had people coming to him, I'm sure, that was warning him, like Fauci and Deborah Birx or whoever else that had that, that prestige, that they was already involved in this and this type of work, and they were warning him, and he totally ignored it. And I just think it was first to weaken the government, to stop people from investigating him in some type of way, and of course he ended up investing in one of these drugs, Maduro. That's why I refuse to get Maduro. I will take the vaccine, but I won't get Maduro because his money is in Maduro as well. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is Republican 101 because they got rid of a lot of people that's on Medicare, that's on Social Security, that would be any burden to the state. And I just think by him relegating it to the governors, that was his excuse. Not once, I think, have we ever had such a catastrophe where the federal government was not in charge. And
Yeah.
this,
Well, actually, we did the flu epidemic of 1918. Woodrow Wilson refused to even mention it. It was never even mentioned by the White House. But on a state-by-state basis, here in Oregon, masks were mandated, and there was a huge court case where the defendant came in, with his head wrapped in a towel with just a little slit for his eyes to look through as a statement of objection to it. But the court required him to. I mean, it's an amazing history. But Charles, I got to move along. But thank you. Your point was very well made. Jim in Woodstock, Illinois. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Yeah, Tom. I've for years been teaching a course in storytelling, culture, and myth, and I had some years ago a professor from the University of Missouri, Columbia, a professor of cultural geography, did his dissertation infiltrating skinhead groups in the Ozarks, and he said that those same leadership of the skinheads showed up in the Tea Party years later. So you were making that connection between race, the Tea Party, and Freedom Caucus. So I just thought that reminded me of that anecdote. Is all. And thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that I think you can track this all the way back to the America First movement in the 1930s that Franklin Roosevelt had to deal with, the neo-fascist movement in the United States. I mean, it's not like there's been a shortage of these things. Thank you for the call. Bob in Long Beach, California. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Well, I'm wondering about the International Court at The Hague looking at Donald Trump from all the evidence.
We pulled out of the agreement so that they have no jurisdiction over us. George Bush pulled us out when he was accused of war crimes.
What I'm wondering is are they still up and running, and who needs an extradition warrant in order to have them look at something and make a decision? The guy's an international traveler anyway, and even if they did bring a warrant against him, on the way to one of his golf courses on the other side of the world, the Interpol police could pick him up and cart him over there to The Hague. But still, if there's enough evidence against this guy, a case should be brought to the International Court for Crimes Against Humanity. And they ought to be loud about it if there is enough evidence. Take the evidence there, advertise the heck out of it, and be loud about it so the whole world is watching rather than just sneaking around little corners here and there. So, really, it doesn't make any difference. Okay.
I get it. I got to run, but I'm with you, and there needs to be accountability, whether it's the International Criminal Court in The Hague or whether it's some sort of judicial process in the United States, or whether it's a legislative process, an investigation by Congress. There needs to be accountability. The American people need to know what the hell happened, who did what, and why. Bob, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's been a lot of talk about ending the filibuster, and because by the way, the Chauvin trial is suspended is paused for the moment. There's been a lot of talk about ending the filibuster, in large part because H.R. 1 is coming down the road, the For the People Act, the thing that would render illegal much of what Georgia just passed through their legislature, for example. It would establish national standards for elections, which Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution allows for. In fact, just to make that point, let me pull out my handy pocket Constitution here. Article 1, Section 4. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations. So, people are going, oh, it's not federal takeover of our elections. No, we've had federal standards for elections for a long, long time. It's in the Constitution. But anyhow, that's where all this focus is being put about, saving the world by ending the filibuster. But frankly, I think that there's a bigger issue, and that is that 90% of all the food on the planet, the planet, what's called the terrestrial net primary production, the planet's ability to produce food, has been consumed or degraded or destroyed by humans. That as a consequence, we're eliminating nature. If you add up the weight of all the animals, what you find is that we represent about 90% of that total weight, which is pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. And it's just, this is, and what is stopping us from saving the human, and not to mention global warming. Just think for a minute about the world that our children and our grandchildren are inheriting and how radically different it's going to be. Tennessee was underwater, right? In Nashville, this from MSN, Microsoft Network. Unrelenting rainfall in Nashville turned roads to rapids, sweeping vehicles off the streets and drowning a motorist who was carried away. One of at least 4 people killed during a storm that continues to threaten the city on Sunday, the authorities said. It's supposed to crest actually today, early this morning. They note a flood in 2010 that was among the worst in the city's history had 13 inches of rain over a 36-hour period, leaving 26 people dead, and took months to clean up. A lot of the horrors of the bill that was passed by the Georgia legislature, and frankly, this is my personal conspiracy theory, which, and I may well be wrong, which is probably why it got very little national coverage. But I think one of the reasons that the Georgia, why that the ban the water, ban the drinks, and shut down mail-in voting and all this other stuff and by the way, allow the Republican Party to end Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, get him out of the picture, and let political people, the Republican Party, appoint the chairpersons or a single person who can replace the entire voting board. I forget the name of it, but unique to Georgia. But the elections commission, the local group that is overseeing the elections on a county by county or precinct by precinct basis, just blow them out of the water and replace them with a Republican politician. And that Republican politician can decide how many hours the polling places are going to be open, how many machines they're going to have, whether they're going to have 10-minute lines or whether they're going to have 10-hour lines, whether the votes are even going to be counted, how they're going to deal with provisional ballots, whether they're going to not count people who are voting in the wrong precinct because they got bad information from some right-wing group that's polling them or something like that, or they're seeing these phony baloney ads. So this anyhow, the reason I think that they did this the day they did, and it went through the House, the Senate, and the governor signed it all within less than 9 hours, was not just the governing by surprise part that we talked about last week when I was reading to you from Milton Mayer's book, but also because one of the worst thunderstorms in a long time was on its way. And I think they knew if we get this bill signed today, the news tomorrow is going to principally be about all the people who lost their homes and the cars that got flooded and the trees that are down and the power lines that are out. People in Georgia aren't going to be paying attention to what we did. And sure enough, that's what happened. And now but the bottom line is this is all climate change. We are looking at the leading edge of an unimaginable disaster. We have CO2 levels right now in the United States that the last time this world saw them, there was not one single human on this planet. 3 million years ago. Our species is only 300,000 years old. In our most modern form, we're really only about 10,000 years old, maybe 50,000. And 3 million years ago, when we had this much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, the oceans were 90 feet higher than they are now. Parts of our country and parts of the world that are producing food were desert. Some of the deserts were jungles. I mean, everything was different. You think democracy is going to survive that? You think civilization is going to survive that? That's the world our grandchildren are coming into. So we've got to stop polluting the world. We've got to back away from this, and we've got to start remediating the pollution that we've already done with things like regenerative agriculture and possibly some technology solutions. And what's standing in the way of all of that? The filibuster. You want to save the world? You want to provide a decent planet for our children and our grandchildren and their children? Should they have any? I mean, just look out 100 years from now, when our grandchildren or our children's children are coming into age. It's not that. I mean, it's not that far away, really. Is this the world we want to give to them? So yeah, ending the filibuster so that we can pass legislation that'll give everybody voting rights is absolutely essential. Ending the filibuster so that we can do something about, Jim Crow, anti-voter operations in multiple states from being run by the Republicans. Very important stuff. Ending the filibuster so that we can pass legislation that might rein in and regulate some of America's most toxic monopolies and the way that banksters and investment houses rip us off and all these other things. That's important stuff. But ending the filibuster so that we can get something like the Green New Deal, so that we can actually start doing something about climate change in a way that might help America as a byproduct, or to help America but do something about climate change as a byproduct. I'll take either one. That seems to me like existentially important. You know, yes, we want to strengthen Social Security. Yeah, we'd love to have Medicare for all. Those are all important things in this moment. But we're talking about the future viability of the human race, or at least human civilization. What we call civilization. We've got to end the filibuster, or at least reform it so that it can no longer be used as an obstacle to legislation, that it just provides a senator with an opportunity to pontificate at length. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. By the way, I just published over at HartmannReport.com that article with all the links to, hang on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
That article with all the links to how everything changed on April 7th and all the conservative sites and the commentaries. If our lawyer friend is still listening, you can check it out. It's HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just want to say you're amazing. You touch on everything I care about. But
Thank you.
That police officer you mentioned, you wonder what was in his past, he put a knee on a 14-year-old kid. And this morning I took a knee at 8:46 because I was watching MSNBC. And if you take a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, there is no doubt that that is murder. And I marched in 4 Black Lives Matter protests. But what made me sad is my daughters marched in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, and in Pittsburgh the cops blocked my daughter off. They blocked all the young kids off on both sides of the bridge so they couldn't get off. And those officers were in combat gear. And then 4 Blackhawks went down on them. And they were innocent protesters. And it just gets me so upset. So I'm so glad you tell all the stories of everyone.
Well, thank you, Jessica, excuse me. Yeah, what we're seeing in America with regard to the right to protest, or at least what we were seeing during the Bush administration, was something that I think is, very much like what is playing out right now in Belarus, or in Myanmar. It wasn't quite as bad as Myanmar. I mean, they killed, 50, 60 people over the weekend. And they haven't been shooting protesters, but they have been assaulting protesters left and right. It's been going on here in Portland as well. So, Jessica, spot on, and very well said. Thank you very much for the call. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about Trump, but I couldn't agree more. We need to pass the filibuster to save our planet and save humanity and forget about colonizing Mars. We just clean up our own planet and get the filibuster done. But I guess I was off by about 50,000. About 3 weeks ago, I said that Trump had 450,000 deaths on his hands. And like you said, UCLA just came out with 400, that basically he's murdered. But in February 7th here, Trump's implicated himself. He basically, the smoking gun is right here. He said to Bob Woodward, and this was in a private interview, he said that, he says, it is more deadly than your strenuous flus. And he says it's 5% more deadly versus 1% or less than 1%. He says, so this is deadly stuff. This is very easily found on the internet, and you remember that interview. And then publicly, he took
it's
a
in
totally
Woodward's book?
I'm sorry?
It's in Woodward's book?
Yeah, it was from his interview. It was. I even saw it on Rachel Maddow and all that. And you can easily Google it. What I Googled was Trump said to Bob Woodward that the COVID virus was very deadly. And you'll just come across a whole plethora of articles, Tom.
Yep.
So he said that to Woodward in private, but publicly he did a different stance. And I still feel, I maintain, and I may be wrong on this, everything he's done in his political career here has been under the direction and for the benefit of Putin. That's just my opinion.
I can't disagree with that, Steve. I wouldn't say everything, but I think that if Vladimir Putin Or for that matter, if Putin and bin Salman and Xi, I mean, you know, if the kind of autocrats of the world got together and said to Donald Trump, here's a punch list, Trump punched every point in that punch list. Steve, thanks a lot for the call. Spot on. Coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, you know, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Easy flow. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, back to the pandemic and the way that Trump screwed it up. There's one other guy in the world that screwed up the pandemic as badly as Trump. Or at least, you know, who is running a large country. And that's Jair Bolsonaro down in Brazil. And this from AP News, the Associated Press, this morning. Brazil, this is by David Biller and Mauricio Cervese. Brazil currently accounts for 1/4 of the entire world's daily COVID deaths, more than any other single nation. Now, by the way, we held that distinction up until just a few weeks ago. Brazil is now pushing us into second place. And the article says, and that nation is now on the verge of an even greater calamity. The nation's 7-day average of 2,400 deaths stands to reach 3,000 within weeks, 6 experts told the Associated Press. That's nearly the worst level seen by the U.S., although Brazil has 2/3 of our population. Spikes of daily deaths could soon hit 4,000. On Friday, it was 3,650. And these are just reported, by the way. Keep in mind, Brazil's healthcare system is, shall we say, somewhat third world and dysfunctional, particularly in the rural areas. And then they go on to point out that, you know, the restrictions or activity they implemented last year were half-hearted and consistently sabotaged by President Jair Bolsonaro, who sought to stave off economic doom. See, I'm telling you, the reason why Trump didn't want he locked down the country on March, 15th, thereabouts, and then he lifted that lockdown a month later. Why? And started pushing to open the country back up. The one and only time he used the Defense Production Act was to force, you know, mostly black and brown meat workers, slaughterhouse workers and meatpacking plant workers to go back to work. Remember that? He wouldn't invoke the Defense Production Act to produce more tests. He wouldn't invoke the Defense Production Act to make more masks or to make more gowns or to, you know, more PPE. No. It was to send the slaughterhouse workers and the meatpacking workers back into their working places where they were dropping like flies from COVID and continued to. But because of the Defense Production Act, the guys who own the slaughterhouses and the meatpacking plants, they now have immunity from prosecution. They can't be sued. Bolsonaro, he's not doing exactly the same kind of thing, but he's running the same script that Trump did. These guys were best buds. And now, of course, we have these variants, which are burning through Europe, are burning through Michigan. I have a bunch of friends in Michigan, as well as, of course, my three brothers who all live in Michigan, and their families. And Michigan is starting to see an explosion of cases. Why? Because the British variant is there. Wait till the South African variant comes. The British variant is far more contagious and will spread through, things like apartment buildings that the wild COVID typically didn't. And then the South African variant infects children and kills young people. And that's here in the United States. It's just not widespread yet. Right now, we're seeing a new wave of the British variant. Well, in Brazil, they not only have those two variants, but they've got a Brazilian variant that's very, very close to the South African variant. And so back to the story from the Associated Press. This is what happens when you've got a president who is more interested in having the economy work, because he's, funded entirely by big business and billionaires. Brazil, same as the United States. Our Supreme Court set this up with Citizens United. I don't know, I don't know the details of how it came about in Brazil. I think it's just probably decades, centuries of political corruption. But as Biller and Savernise write for the Associated Press today, it may be too late with a more contagious variant rampaging across Brazil. For the first time, new daily cases topped 100,000 on March 25th, with many more uncounted. The death toll could be reaching 500,000 by July and exceeding that of the United States by the end of this year. The system, they're talking about the hospitals, the system is already buckling, with almost all states' intensive care units at or near capacity. The city's oxygen supply, they're talking about Sao Paulo. They interviewed a doctor there. The city's oxygen supply isn't guaranteed, and stocks of sedatives required for intubation in intensive care units will soon run out. See, when you get intubated, when they shove a tube all the way down into your lungs to make you breathe, you've got to be knocked out first, or you'll just cough that thing out. And if they run out of sedatives, they can't intubate people. If they can't intubate people, they can't keep them from dying. Brazil's state-run Science and Technology Institute, it's called Fiocruz, on Tuesday called for a 14-day lockdown. Yeah, you think? But Jair Bolsonaro's out there, everything's good, don't worry, we don't need nothing, we're good. Right. So what say you? We've got a lot of topics here on the table. How do we hold Trump accountable? How do we get rid of the filibuster? What do we do about guns?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And like I said, that article that I published back in January with all the links that just lays out that April 7th thing, we just republished it at hartmannreport.com.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up, and other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Joe Biden is giving a talk right now. He's basically laying out that, we've got these variants rampaging through America. We talked about this last week, that what is sweeping Europe right now is not just on its way here. It's here. It's going through the upper Midwest, Michigan in particular right now. The British variant. The South African variant has popped up in a few places in some of our larger cities. We have our own homegrown variants that are happening here in the United States. There's the Brazilian variant as well. So anyhow, he's talking about that, and he just said there's a lot of grandparents that would love to safely hug their grandchildren, and now they can because they're getting vaccines they couldn't a short time ago, and so it's kind of a feel-good speech. I'm glad that he's out there, that he's doing these talks, and he's being more available to the American people. It's something that's really needed. We need presidents to do their own PR. But all that said, let me pick up some of your phone calls and see what you have to say about the issues of the day. Steve in Bombay, New York. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Longtime listener, at least a dozen years, second-time caller. But I was thinking that you might want to increase your focus a little bit. Sometimes the professor gets annoying questions from the students, so this is one of those. I appreciate your focus on what the right has done, but as a Democrat, I believe that my congressional leaders should be my advocates. And one of the things I've learned, a couple of things I learned from you over the years, A, the Gang of Eight gets intelligence report. B, there's immunity speaking from the floor. So my question is, once the Woodward interview came out and Trump exposed all this stuff, my question is, did the congressional Democrats know any of this? If they did know it, then they didn't say anything. If they didn't know it, why not raise holy hell and say, hey, because I'm reminded of the torture report that Feinstein put out, basically saying, we didn't know they were really torturing people. So I guess that's my question is, why didn't they say anything or, like that?
So, Steve, I get everything you're saying, except I'm a little confused here. You said if they know this, and why didn't they say it? And I don't know what the this and the it are that you're specifically referring to here.
If they knew Trump was lying and they knew all these lying about the contagiousness of the disease and how downplaying it.
Oh, Democrats have been yelling about that since April of last year when Trump started with his reopen the country on April 17th.
I guess what I'm looking for is Schumer or Pelosi to say, you know what, we have conflicting intelligence information that
they did say that
saying is not true.
They did say that repeatedly. The problem was because they didn't control, they controlled the House of Representatives for some of that time. It was difficult for them to hold hearings where they could say, okay, what's going on here? If my recollection is correct, the Democrats held the House. I'd have to go back and look, but in any case, I would like to see.
That's all,
Kind of in the spirit of what you're saying, Steve, I would like to see the Democrats, at the very least, doing the kind of theater, and although I think it would be productive theater, because the whole point of theater is to, entertain and inform, political theater. and the entertainment part has to be there or people don't pay attention to it, which is why, Republicans were so successful with Benghazi and with Hillary Clinton's emails. I would like to see that same kind of political theater being done around Republican complicity in the death of 500,000 Americans. And not just Donald Trump, because he was the principal evangelist, but he was assisted in this by, famously high profile. I mean, Ron DeSantis and Kristi Noem. I mean, Kristi Noem, when she said, hey, 600,000 motorcyclists coming from all over the country to South Dakota, so you can all get together and infect each other and then go back home. And I mean, the scientists have said that 260,000 cases of COVID came out of that outside of South Dakota. Which would presumably be, 2,600 deaths anyway, at a 1% death rate, or 4, 5, 6,000 deaths as you get into the 2-3% death rate. It depends on the age group it's hitting, and she was okay with that. You had the governor of Georgia, you had the governor of look at Texas, Greg Abbott. Down there saying, oh, yeah, no, it's all good, and the lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, saying, yeah, those of us over 70, we're willing to die for the economy, essentially. And in every case, there were Democrats calling them out. In every case, there were Democrats saying, this is crazy. They just were not doing it with a singular united voice, which is the unfortunate thing. The Republicans are really good at coherent messaging. The Democrats, not so much.
I really love the idea of a shadow government.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah, indeed.
Okay,
although
thanks,
right at the moment we don't need that. Yeah, thank you, Steve. We should have done that during the Trump administration. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's on your mind?
Yeah, the Trump administration, as I see it, you heard of the 7 deadly sins, Tom?
Yep. Yes, sir.
Greed, lust, envy, lust. I see Trump practicing those deadly sins even now.
Yeah.
This administration, the top one, in my opinion, greed filters all of them. They intertwine, and that's how I see it. We're all affected by those. I try not to practice it, the opposite. And I don't know, prayer. What I try to do, St. Francis of Assisi. I'm not a religious guy. When I was introduced to that prayer, wow. I see you practicing, Tom. Your guest is by giving that you shall receive. That's the antidote to Trump. But they're so infected by this greed, and that's all I got to say. And as far as the pandemic, maybe you can comment on it. I see similarities with the smallpox epidemic, with the blankets. Give it to the Redskins. Remember that? I don't know what year that took place, but I see similarities. Let the blue states burn. They're black, red, brown, who cares? Make America white again. I hate to say that. As far as your callers, hang in there. Hang in there. We shall overcome. Believe me, it will pass. And that's how I feel, Tom. There's the rainbow at the end. Okay?
Yeah.
Keep on pushing, Tom.
Okay, I will do that. You too, Bobby. It's always nice to hear from you. Thank you. Daniel in Manchester, New Hampshire. Hey, Daniel, what's up?
So I didn't realize that New Hampshire was the first state that, did you say we were the first to have the reopen rallies? Or the first
Yes,
state
the
to
official reopen rallies sponsored by FreedomWorks, yeah.
So I thought it was weird that we were the first, because we are kind of a swing state. We're about 50-50. But then it hit me. Do you remember one of Donald Trump's earlier chief of staff, Corey Lewandowski?
Yeah, who was also his campaign manager.
He moved up here. What's that?
He was also his campaign manager, wasn't he? When Bannon got fired after Manafort left? Yeah.
I don't remember exactly. I really remember him because he's the one who shoved that female reporter. But after he was dismissed, probably for something like that, he moved up here to New Hampshire, and there was lots of talk to him running for the Senate to try to take out one of our 2 female Democratic senators. Luckily, he didn't get in. But I wonder if just him being here had something to do with us being the first to do the reopen rallies. Because again, we're not the reddest state in the country. We're a 50-50 state. We're not the biggest. We don't have the biggest amount of Trump supporters.
What do you
no, but
think
you're
about
first
that?
in the
Have you ever
nation in
think
terms of the elections. Yeah. You know, that would make sense, Daniel. And I wonder if Lewandowski moving to New Hampshire was part of some kind of a strategy to get ready for 2024, or even 2020, actually, because this happened in mid 2020, didn't it? Well, no, the primaries were. There was no primary.
I don't remember if it was during the midterms in 2018 or if I don't know exactly when he left the cabinet and came up here. But I mean, I know it's a Republican platform to go for the small states like us because it's easy to get the electoral votes and they all have 2 senators.
Right, and it's cheaper. You know, I mean, if you want to advertise to everybody in New Hampshire, it costs a fraction of what it would cost if you tried to advertise to everybody in California. Daniel, all good points. It's fascinating to speculate. I have no idea if there's an association between Lewandowski and that open rally that was the first one, I think on April 18th. But Daniel, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. You wanted to set me straight on the potato famine?
Yes, I do. But first I want to say, Mr. Hartmann, you are on fire today. This program, with no guests and no other interruptions, you have absolutely nailed everything of importance. Kudos to you. You're always good, but you are incredible today. Good work.
Well, thank you.
And thank you to your dear Louise for asking. She heard me on hold there and asked about all my rescue dogs in Mexico. Please thank her.
Oh, hey, Nicholas, that's actually Joyce. Louise does not answer the phone anymore. It's been a year
Joyce
or so.
answered the phone, but Louise heard that I was on and said something to
Sean.
Joyce.
That was Sean who dropped in and said that to you. I'm sorry.
Joyce said it was that it was Louise. Anyway, thank whoever, because that means a lot to me. I do a lot of work.
She's our dear Sean, too, our executive producer.
There you go. There you go. Listen, apart from all that, and there's nothing I can add to everything you've said today. It's absolutely brilliant program today. What I did want to say is partly because 2 of your Irish listeners, chatters, jumped right away when you mentioned the potato famine. And on behalf of my ex as well, who's Irish, I do know a lot about that history. And I really would like to see everybody stop using that propagandistic term, which was British generated, of the potato famine. Lack of potatoes did not kill the Irish. They did not starve for lack of potatoes. They lacked because of the gargantuan food shipments out of Ireland by the English landowners to England, including grains.
You're right. They produced enough wheat to feed all the Irish, but they shipped it all to England. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. They were sending it to England just to feed their cattle, and it was despicable. In Cork alone, which was a very small port at that time, there were more than 50 freighter loads of foodstuffs shipped out of Ireland during the height of the so-called famine. Plenty enough to feed the Irish. It was a despicable history. And that's not of enormous importance to most of your listeners, but a couple of the Irish jumped right away out of their socks, and I said, okay, I'll phone in.
Well, it's also important, I think, to show the evils of colonialism. I mean, that was,
absolutely.
At that time, Ireland was, functionally a British colony, and the whole point of colonialism, going all the way back to Roman times, the whole point of colonialism is to extract all the resources from the country that has been colonized, including the human resources. Pull out any human talent, pull out people that you can enslave. Pull out any natural resources,
and kill anybody who got in your way while you were doing it.
Right, and if you leave anybody there, right, and if you leave anybody there, force them to make your products or make your food. This is Gandhi's spinning wheel thing, and his salt march. Yep.
Yes.
Force the colonized people to basically kind of roll over and put up with it.
Yes, the great construct of empire. It's still going on.
There you go.
Anyway,
Well
that's
said,
a minor
Nicholas.
correction, but it's important to some people, so I just thought I'd
It
throw
is.
it out
Well,
there.
I think it's important for history, too. And I did know that history. I just didn't want to go down that rabbit hole in the middle of a good rant. But you're absolutely right. And so thank you. Nicholas, thank you very much for the call. And thanks again for helping out in our chat room over on
Not
YouTube.
at all.
It's always
Not
nice
at
to hear
all.
from you.
My pleasure.
Good
My
talking
pleasure.
with you, Nicholas.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back. In the science revolution this week, look out as Rand Paul may be infecting America with a brand new COVID epidemic, and we may have no protection. Investigative journalist Greg Pallas is here on the Exxon Valdez disaster 33 years ago. He's saying, don't buy Exxon's fable of a drunken captain. We just passed World Water Day, and Rihanna Eckel from Food and Water Watch drops by about the growing threat of water privatization. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today? Pam?
Hello.
Hey, Pam.
Hello. Hey.
Hi. I know
thank
you've been
you.
on hold a while. My apologies, but thanks for being there.
no.
What's on your mind?
Oh, sure. Important. I appreciate the conversation I've heard so far. Tom, as it relates to racism, for me, just looking at the opening statements with the Chauvin trial and just looking at that tape, Tom, anybody who sees that and does not believe that that was a murder committed, I think something is seriously wrong with them. So at this stage in the game, Tom, I always present to you, I ask, what does the white community, what do you want us to do as black people? And then what are you willing to do to make this situation better? Because I know in the past, Tom, when black people have boycotted or burned down cities, we've gotten results. We don't want to do that, but we will not continue to just go backwards and live the life that we're living. Tom, as a black person, and I'm just going to be honest about this, when I encounter white people, one of the first things that I say to myself, I hope this is not a racist person, white person. That is my daily encounter with all white people. And the reason I say that, Tom, to myself, so that I can put myself in the frame of mind to calm down in the event that it is, and so that I just won't completely go off, because I'm at a level I'm fed up. So what I ask the good white people, are you doing all that you can to help end this viciousness in this racist society? And as for the Republican Party, they're helping to perpetuate that. And with the election of Donald Trump as their leader, I have no purpose for the Republican Party. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party, Tom, and you correct me, they're both private institutions. So I know we need a multi-party system, but the Republican Party, for me, no go. And if they're proud to claim Trump and all the rest of this nonsense, particularly what they did in Georgia, then I'm proud to say, yes, I think you're a racist. Trump is a criminal sociopath. And if you support him, that's problematic. I don't have room for that, Tom, and I'm not going to entertain that nonsense. So I want the Republican Party, whatever you dismantled, abolished, disbanded, whatever they do, I want it gone. Because I see them as a serious, serious danger to this country. And that's just my truth. So, Tom, you as a white man, and I know you can't speak for all white people, what is it in white people that they still, and some of them, not all, I don't want to generalize, that they have such a severe hatred for black people and other people? Tom, we were kidnapped and tortured to be here. We built this country as slaves. I don't even know my true last name because I'm carrying around the name of a slave master. Everywhere I'm judged, it's based on how I look. No matter what college I graduated from, no matter how decent I try to be. And I'm trying to maintain my humanity because that's what I was taught. That's the representation of my family. But I'm not going to tolerate this racism. I don't care who it's from. And I'm going to speak out against it. And if you don't see Chauvin as the murderer that he is, then something is wrong with you mentally. What black police officer could choke and kill a white man and not have the white community up in arms?
Yeah.
Tom, I know I'm putting a lot on the table, but I'm telling you, we cannot function like this as black people. And we are fed up and we are tired. And we are mad as hell. And I'll hang up, Tom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam. I completely get what you're saying, and I agree with you in every regard. I think the one thing that and Pam did just hang up. I thought maybe. In any case, the one thing I would add, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to write about this afternoon and make it my rant tomorrow, is that what we have to do is identify that strain of racism within the Republican Party. There used to be a powerful strain of racism inside the Democratic Party. It's called the Dixiecrats. And it was basically the Southern Democrats, the Strom Thurmonds of the world, even Robert Byrd was in on this. He reformed himself, but he was, I think, the only one who actually did. You had, the George Wallaces. They were all Democrats. And the Democratic Party in the mid-1960s said, we're going to purge our party of this. And that's when Nixon came in and said, well, hey, white racists in the South or across the country, the Republican Party's got a place for you. Now that racist group has essentially coalesced, they've become one thing under one banner, one umbrella, in front of one sign with one logo and one leader, which makes it a lot easier to identify them, and that is Trumpism. These are the Trump followers. They're not talking about free trade or workers' rights or cleaning the air no, they're talking about brown people coming from Mexico and black immigrants coming from Haiti and oh my God, and BLM and Antifa. The racism that has infected the Republican Party is called Trumpism. And thank you, Pam, for flipping my brain on that. I do appreciate it. It's always so nice to hear from you. And we will continue this conversation tomorrow because I think that Pam has touched on one of the most important aspects of the American political dialogue right now. So get out there, get active, tag You're It, share the good word. Check out HartmannReport.com. You'll see that piece I wrote about Trump on April 7th. I think you'll find it useful.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.